Hi, so the screencast is about tubes and standing waves, and basically the way that sound works in instruments like bugles and flutes is through reflection that happens in the tube. There's different patterns with the frequency between tubes that have an open-open end and ones that have an open-closed end. And if it's an open end will always begin with an antinode because the air is free to move out, whereas if it's closed, it'll always start with an antinode. So when it's open, like in the first example, it starts with an antinode and then node and then an antinode, and the distance between each node and antinode is a quarter wavelength, and then that leads to the very first one being the length of it being 1/2 wavelength, which then leads to the wavelength being equal to 2 times the length. And then the frequency, because the frequency becomes from this original equation where velocity is wavelength times frequency, which then alters to frequency equals velocity divided by wavelength. So then the frequency for the first line is velocity divided by twice the wavelength. And as you can see with each one, it tends to have a pattern where it just, if it's open, it tends to hit every frequency because it's velocity over twice the length, and then 2 times velocity over twice the length, and then 3 times velocity over twice the length. And then with open closed, it's a different scenario. It first starts out with, well, if it's open closed, it'd be an antinode and then a node. But anyway, it's a quarter wavelength for the length, and then the wavelength is 4 times the length, and the frequency itself is velocity divided by 4 times the length. And then it switches to 3 times velocity over 4 times the length and 5 velocity over 4 times the length. And basically what this is showing right here is a pattern that when it's an open closed tube, it only hits the odd frequencies instead of all the frequencies. So then right here is a picture of what it would look like, the spectrum would look like, I guess, if it's open, and open closed. And the bottom one is only hitting the odd frequencies, whereas the top is hitting every single one of them. And then in lab, after learning that, we were experimenting around with this wooden flute, and basically what we found when it was an open end is that the spacing between the peaks is the same, and there's evidence of a lot of frequency, and it shows a pattern of the frequencies being evenly spaced. Whereas then if you look at the open closed, it's skipping some spikes, which means that it has a lower frequency and it shifts a little bit to the left, but it's still evenly spaced and there's a pattern to it. We also experimented with just what emphasis had to do with it, and we did it blowing lightly versus blowing harder, and basically it doesn't affect the frequencies, it just adds more emphasis on frequencies down the line. Then we also experimented with the way tuning forks work, because they don't have the patterns that tubes and standing waves and strings do. And we basically just found no pattern because it acts weird. The tuning fork has a box that amplifies only the frequencies that it likes, and it has the ability to kill the bad sounding frequencies, which means it doesn't have nodes or antinodes, which explains why there's no pattern, and it makes it hard to compare to things like the wooden flute. And what would happen if you were to take, this isn't really on my notes on the screen, but what would happen if you were to take an open closed instrument and then cut it in half? It would actually turn into an open instrument then, because you cut off one of the ends and that end would make it open again. And it turns into an open instrument, so the lowest harmonic is 4 times as much because it's half the length and it's changed into an open instrument. And that's it. Thanks.